First of all, the bits of etiquette. If you haven't done one of these sessions already, if you could move your view to speaker view, then whoever's speaking you will see come up. And also, if you could all mute yourself until the power, I ask you to unmute yourself, if that's okay. So I'm Faye Selvin and I'm the Chief Executive of the Big Life Group, and I'm just going to chair this session. And a really big thank you to People's Powerhouse for making one of my dreams come true, which is to pretend to be Ellen, the British version of Ellen, an old white lesbian, nearly sat on a sofa interviewing important people. So I should also say swilling Yorkshire tea, but unfortunately mine's gone cold, so that as well. So thank you all for joining this session. This is the listening session. So it's an opportunity for people whose voices are seldom heard to speak to power, which in this case is our King of the North, Andy Burnham. And I'm sure many of you might want to ask him questions about that. Now, it's quite a fast-moving pace we've got going here. So what we want to do is have, I think we've got 5 participants who are going to talk to us or say a few things to Andy Burnham very quickly, one after another. I'll introduce them, and then we'll ask Andy to come back on his thoughts about what they've said. After that session, the second half of the session will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions you want to ask to Andy. Please bear in mind we're trying to get through a lot, so this isn't an opportunity for you to speak for hours. It's a short, sharp session. So we'll kick off then, if everybody is ready to go, with Mimi Deering from Get It Done. So if Mimi, you could unmute yourself and speak for a few minutes about what you want to say to Andy Burnham. Thank you.
Sorry, could I actually, I'm really, really sorry about this, but I've had terrible technical difficulties. Can I send you my presentation really quickly and potentially go at the end? I'm so sorry about this.
Okay, we'll ask Kirsty to come in next, but Johnny, perhaps if you could liaise with Mimi outside of this, and we'll take it from there. So Kirsty, are you ready to go?
Yes, hello. So I'm here representing New Life Church, which is an evangelical church in Ashton in Tameside, and we've been working quite hard on doing a few community-based projects that we've been doing for a number of years, but obviously has heightened quite a lot in the last few months with what we've been doing. So I'm here as a volunteer, so I volunteer on some of our projects, and I think named today is our Thursday feast, which says it in the name really. It is a Thursday, and it was initially set up to provide food within the community and actually provide a service for people within poverty, homelessness. We have asylum seekers that come in, people that struggle with their mental health, with social isolation and addiction. So all sorts of different people come along, and it is open to anybody. And we actually do it on a Wednesday as well as a Thursday. And our main purpose really is just to look at how we can rebuild our communities, working with the most vulnerable in our communities, taking individuals where they're at. So even though we're just providing them with a hot meal, we're also there to provide them with a listening ear. It might be that we are able to signpost them to some help they might need, whether it will be, as I say, we have some asylum seekers that might need a bit of extra support, or we work very closely with our local food bank. They're also, they're the Trussell Trust, but they come into our church centre as well. So it really is just about being a safe place to serve those vulnerable and build relationships, really. It's not about like a one-hit wonder. Obviously, we want them to be able to move on, but we also want to build positive relationships so that people feel that they're listened to, really, and that they're valued. And they're not just there as a project, but they're individuals that just need to be valued as individuals as to where they're at. And it's growing. We've managed to keep it open throughout all of COVID, obviously very differently. So in the height, we did a takeaway service. Now we are open again, but we are very COVID safe. So it has changed, but we've realised the absolute importance of still providing that service really, and it has expanded. We do need a bigger space. We'd like to be able to do things to engage people a bit further if we can. But really, it's just about being a voice in the community and maybe working with other agencies, local government, I don't know really. But yeah, that's who we are, and that's what we've been doing at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you, Kirsty. Is there one ask you have of Andy, or something you think that GM should be doing before we move on to Thomas?
I think our biggest thing really is how we can work better with our local authorities. We are a church, we are a registered charity. You know, we have a community development worker, so we do work really hard. But it's about making better links really. For example, we do have our own premises, but we could do with bigger premises. We could do, you know, so like say we can expand, because it is a growing project, and we often find it very difficult to work with perhaps the local authority, the local government, in order to, because you know, there are avenues that we've explored, but we've sort of come to a bit of a stop really. So it's about how we can better work together with the outside agencies, I think.
That's a great question, thank you, and one I'm sure Andy will be interested in exploring, because we need to build on community assets like the work that you and your fellow volunteers are doing. Thank you very much, Kirsty. Okay, if you could mute yourself, Kirsty, we'll move on to Thomas. If Thomas can share, Thomas and Naomi, I think we have from GM Mutual Aid. That's
right, yeah, hi Faye. It's 5 minutes in total, so we won't take 5 minutes each, promise. So yes, my name is Tom Waring. I'm from the Greater Manchester Mutual Aid Network. So since the first lockdown, local groups formed all across Greater Manchester in order to organise essential support in the face of the virus. These groups, often called mutual aid groups, rapidly organised essential support for people during lockdown. So for example, within days, they organised shopping and prescription pickups for those isolating. These groups continue to organise support and connection for local people, and they range in size from 10 people on a street coming together to large groups organised on Facebook, which cover entire boroughs. Many of these groups formed prior to the outbreak, it's worth saying. And it's also worth mentioning these groups are not voluntary sector organisations. They're groups of local people coming together, organising the things they need for one another. So the Greater Manchester Mutual Aid Network, who I'm part of, is a group of those who are part of and working with these mutual aid groups. We don't represent every mutual aid group in Greater Manchester, so I invite anyone listening who's part of a group but not involved in the network, please get in touch. I'll put my details in the chat. So we're going to talk about two things really quickly. The first is the unique position of these groups in Greater Manchester, and secondly, we'll explain that in order to capitalise on these groups' amazing work, we need to see fundamental power shifts in local areas. So over to you, Naomi.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm Naomi. I'm with Bury Mutual Aid, and like Tom said, Bury Mutual Aid doesn't replace the vital voluntary sector or local government. We appeared because when there was a need to rapidly organise in a strange new space of total uncertainty, and because we're embedded in communities, we provided ethically appropriate food parcels, fixed a broken bed for a disabled person over a weekend, used paper leaflets to deliver information to people who are digitally excluded. But we also responded within a few hours to a shout out for help on Facebook, plus lots of other things, obviously. But we're a constantly changing loose network. We're trying to respond and be part of getting us through this crisis and beyond. But we need system players to consistently treat us with trust and support while influencing doing the things we can't do. We need people to listen to our stories, learn from what we're seeing and hearing, act on those insights strategically and not just in pockets of good practice. We need full support right across GM. This is a great opportunity for a power shift and positive change for local people.
Does that mean Naomi?
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, as Naomi explained, you know, mutual aid is not fully supported across Greater Manchester. There's some examples of good practice, such as in Trafford and Rochdale, where the local authority and voluntary sector is listening to mutual aid groups, supporting them where they can. and getting out of the way of groups wherever possible so they can do their thing. Well, we want this to be the norm across Greater Manchester. So to conclude, we should be seeing support across Greater Manchester for the efforts of mutual aid groups. However, we're not seeing this yet. We need those within the system to listen to groups, learn from what we're seeing and hearing, and support us where they can. And we need a shift of culture within local areas where local groups are trusted and power is relinquished. Just to say, this is not the big society where funded services are cut and local people are expected to pick up the slack. This is about placing trust and real power in the hands of local people. So therefore, our ask, I suppose, is for visible support from yourself, Andy, and the combined authority for the efforts of mutual aid and these mutual support groups. This really matters when local authorities and organisations in Greater Manchester don't openly support groups and actively sometimes work against them. So we're asking you to work with us, learn and listen from mutual aid groups in Greater Manchester. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, you two. That was really good and very concise. Yes, local authorities and public bodies, commissioners are easily able to provide and commission services, but actually to support local initiatives is really important and a really well made point. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Sally Bonney from Inspire Women. Sally, do you want to unmute yourself?
If I can. Yes. Okay. Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Sally from Inspire Women in Oldham. How are you, Andy? You okay? You have to give a thumbs up, you're on mute.
Sorry, it's the old, you're on mute. I'm really good, thanks. I'm enjoying it.
Good, that's good to hear. Well, I've just come off a session with lots of women, and I promised that I would wear this. And there is a reason, a really powerful reason for wearing this. The last time I attended a Powerhouse, I actually delivered a session and we walked through the centre of the building with this on. I have loads of photographs that lots of really important people paid me lots of money to keep out of the newspapers. So there you go. I've spent most of my working life, Andy, working in the community, volunteering in the community, from when my sons, who are now quite grown up, were little babies. But my real passion was to grow a movement of women who would use their lived experience and their recovery journey to help other women. And it was really important that those foundations were built on kindness and good old-fashioned, you know, female values, those that my grandmother and great-grandmother had, and, you know, that history that really is there right across Greater Manchester. I'm so incredibly proud of being a Mancunian, even though so many people all over the world had to get different translators because they couldn't understand a word I said half the time. So but I think that's really important because that's where my passion comes from. And you know, 15 years on, we succeeded, along with hundreds of women, to get this women's centre and a women's organisation up and running in Oldham. And you know, COVID has brought so much suffering to people across the world, and so much devastation. And there has been days and there has been moments when we've, you know, and all the other organisations I know have been really pushed to the limit. And I want to give a however here, because in the midst of all of that, there is some real magic that happens. We had to shut our centre in March because it was impossible to run our women's centre with the culture that we have in a safe way. And you know, kind of cue the music to The Great Escape. The women are like, we need to keep connected. So Inspire Magic was born, and you know, many months later, and this isn't a cheeky plug, this is part of me question to you. You know, over 35,000 posts and comments on our closed Facebook group, over 2,000 hours of activities on the internet, all kind of led by a team of 4 local women. You know, no IT department, no marketing department, and I think that's really been our ethos, that in the midst of that, you know, this represents the fact that, you know, so many of the women that I champion are invisible and don't feel like the voice is heard. And you put a pink wig on, you have to be brave and you have to have courage, and people certainly talk about you after, you know. So we focus on what they can do, and that is to grow and to learn and to connect and to be with each other. So I know, Amanda, that you support evidence-based approaches, because this week you were talking about that in terms of Greater Manchester and people suffering in relation to COVID. I also know that just a month ago you took a stand against the government for us too, and that was such a momentous moment for so many of us working in the sector, many who don't have a pink wig, who never ever feel that we listen to. You know, we're champion women, and my question incorporates all of those things, and it includes a call for help as well from me and from my sisters working at the coalface. Lots of us have been able to get COVID emergency fund money. We have to have it spent by March. A lot of the funders will not, the ones we've approached, they won't fund empty buildings. You know, now people might have, you know, have a view on that, but they won't do that. So I believe that the future of women's organisations, particularly women's centres that offer safe spaces, we've been walking a tightrope for many years, even before COVID. And I guess what I'm looking for, Andy, is that we've got evidence of the impact that women's centres and projects like ours work, and we're asking whether you'll make a stand for the women's sector. You'll get us some certainty for women who are often invisible, so that we can maintain these safe spaces during and beyond COVID. And I've been involved in this work now for over 30 years, so I know that's going to have a huge impact, not just on the women that we champion, but on the mental well-being of so many women in the sector that are keeping services alive. So thank you very much. I hope I worked more than 5 minutes.
No,
You were bang on. Thank you, Sally. That was really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take Sonia Denham now from Petrus. Can you
Hello,
unmute?
have you got me? Hi, Andy. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon. As you know,
hi, Sonia.
I'm
Nice
Sonia
to see you.
Denham. Andrew, I'm head of the Petrus community, which is based primarily in Rochdale and Oldham, and we provide services to homeless people and those at risk of homelessness. I'm also here today representing GM Citizens as a member institution. When we think about the words People's Powerhouse, it brings about a feeling of great strength and resilience and determination and passion. And that's what I've observed from our organisations throughout my career, but especially in the last 9 months during this pandemic. I've seen strength and determination and resilience from grassroots organisations, communities, volunteers, frontline workers, and also from the people that we work to provide services for, who are living in ever increasing difficult times and living hand to mouth and fearing each day. We're fortunate that we've been able to continue to provide a COVID safe support space in our Petrus hub in Rochdale, and we've got strong partnerships with local organisations such as Heart and the local authority that enable us to provide a one-stop shop model where people can feel the human compassion and not have to tell their stories of hardship to a piece of equipment. And that's not to say that we haven't embraced a wider offer of digital inclusion. As part of the GM Housing First pilot, within partnerships offer a proven model to ensure that so far 171 people have been housed in permanent accommodation. They're people who previously had no idea when they'd be able to say that they felt warm and safe and secure enough to start rebuilding their lives. Since the start of the pandemic, our Petrus hub has distributed over 14,000 meals. That's 14,000 hungry mouths. As you know, homelessness is an increasing challenge nationally, and services like ours provide added value and can demonstrate social value and have the expertise to deliver proven models. Well, I'm aware that we've got driven local leaders such as yourself, referred to at the beginning as the King of the North, and Steve Rotherham in Liverpool. Services are still trying to make ends meet with no offer of sustainability and longevity. I'd like to know what influence local leaders have on providing a national sustainability plan for what is now a national problem. And with all the best will in the world, compassion, drive and determination has its limits.
Brilliant, thank you, Sonia. God, you get some good questions here, Andy. So one more minute, one more presentation, and then you can come back and tell us your thoughts. So Mimi, are you ready for us now?
I think so. So I think Johnny might be sharing the presentation.
Yeah, that's right. You just let me know when it's time to change the slide.
Yeah, no problem.
Off you go, Mimi.
So hello, my name is Mimi Deering and I'm the director of Get It Done, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been working on over the past year. So just a bit of background information. Get It Done is an arts organisation that was founded in 2017, born out of a frustration with the creative scene in Manchester and how young people were being left out of important conversations being had around the city. So our mission was to combat this and to make grassroots tools accessible to everyone, to start their own thing and to get it done. So from humble beginnings of very punky DIY exhibitions back in 2017, we swiftly snowballed into a socially engaged arts organisation working with charities like Shelter on student housing campaigns, to galleries like the Whitworth on creative critical thinking programmes for young people, to last year being invited as a finalist for the Young Creative of the Year at the Manchester Culture Awards. Next slide. So back in 2019, we were approached by Manchester Central Food Bank to run a programme working in co-production with their food bank users to give access to creative expressions related to their experiences of poverty. So we spent January and February at the food bank packing food parcels and sitting down to chat with families experiencing financial crises, people in temporary accommodation, asylum seekers and refugees. Everyone's story was unique, and though the reasons that brought them to the food bank differed, we found many people keen to be involved to share and express their stories of often comedy, joy and inspiration, and to be part of a creative campaign for change in our city. Next slide. Moving forward to March, and the pandemic of course struck. We had our project funding pulled and had to rethink on how to continue on a remote basis. So after careful consideration, the outputs of our newly devised project were twofold. First, in assembling creative wellbeing activity packs to be distributed in food packages, and second, in creating an online archive of creative stories of poverty, capturing the experiences of Greater Manchester communities in 2020. The online archive of narratives of poverty, which is being launched in January, will be comprised of transcribed interviews, testimonials, photographs taken by food bank users, conversations with staff and blogs. To bring the archive to life, we're working with our engaged audience of young people, mainly local art students, to respond to creative briefs and stories through illustrations, collages and graphic design. The activity packs have been carefully designed by the team to let imaginations run wild, whilst also encouraging participants to think critically about our Manchester communities and how collectively we can create change post-pandemic. So we wanted to do something very personal and also intensely local. These should be our stories about our communities. So the packs are split into 3 sections. In activities for me, we focus on identity, mindfulness and reflection, with zine making, diary writing and Matisse newspaper collaging. In activities for the community, focuses on building strength and connections in local communities. We ask our neighbours if they speak other languages, make protest banners and redesign Piccadilly Gardens, which is quite apt considering the current takedown of the wall. Maybe some of these good designs could be used to influence the redevelopment. And finally, in activities for the world, we think big and reimagine our society. designing our ideal community leader. What do they look like? Who do they represent? Making a manifesto for them, and then designing our dream community space, being as silly as you want, water slides and hot tubs, of course, permitted. To make the art pack open to everybody, no matter their circumstance, we'll be providing the professionally printed pack, felt tips, art supplies, and paper needed for the exercises. For this, we've launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for the creation of 400 packs. So why is all of this important? The material impacts of deprivation are obvious, not being able to put food on the table, to keep the heating on, to pay the bills, but also lack of access to the internet, TV, books, and pens, etc. For positive mental health, everyone needs access to relaxing and creative activities, which in turn reduces the impact of poverty, not just materially, but in terms of well-being. Everybody has creativity and great ideas, and these shouldn't be limited by your bank balance. We expect this project to have a profound impact in the Greater Manchester region. Both the political and media narratives around the issues of food poverty are driven and shaped outside of the control of people who are directly experiencing them. By giving a diverse group of disadvantaged people the opportunity to voice their own experiences, creating their own campaign for change and historical archive, we'll be providing them with a platform to contribute their inputs to the debate and communicate directly with the wider public. So we hope when returning to a world without social distancing, that our archive of stories will help create a manifesto for change, which we hope to present to local councils and inform social wellbeing policies for the future. I think it was MP Tony Lloyd who said, recovering from COVID, we will have to use this experience as the anvil on which we beat out the new world. So where are we now? We passed an exciting milestone this weekend after we totaled 100 out of our 400 pack goal on our crowdfunder. Our first print run is on the way, ready to go to families and individuals in time for Christmas. As we believe everyone should be able to reimagine our city's future, we're also liaising with charities, community groups and schools across Manchester who are interested in distributing packs to their service users. So anyone who's listening today from a frontline agency or community group, if you'd like to try one out, please get in touch. We will also be launching the packs to the wider public in a buy one, give one model for Christmas. So buying a pack at £10, you will not only receive one for your enjoyment or a gift, but you will also fund one to go to a food bank recipient. These will be ready to pre-order from an Etsy link on our website. So in conclusion, we'd like to ask you, Andy, two things. Do you think you can help us build our archive of Manchester stories and get 400 packs out to residents of the region? And finally, can we send you and maybe your family or staff a pack to have a go? Because we'd really love to see what kind of artistic talents and imagination you've got up your sleeve to share with our cohort and audiences.
Brilliant, Mimi. Thank you so much. That was a really great presentation, and I know personally that being creative has helped me get through many a lockdown evening. So some great questions I've got coming up for Andy. So Andy, I'm going to hand over to you now to reflect on the contributions that have been made so far. But I love the idea, and various people did, of us drawing our ideal community leader, and you might want to respond to how you think you might fit that bill.
Well, I'm sure we'd all struggle to fit the bill of the ideal, but thanks, Faye, and thank you, everybody. Amazing contributions there. It was great to listen to. I suppose the way I would start by responding is saying, in some ways, the criticism I make of the government for not listening, you know, I've got to be conscious that nobody here could say the same of me. I mean, I personally think that good politics starts with listening. Good leadership starts with listening, doesn't it? And sometimes it seems like it's the last thing that comes in, you know, and it's, you know, really should be the first, shouldn't it? If you listen and properly listen, then I think then you create the conditions for good leadership at any level, actually, and organisation level or community level or at my level, whatever. So it was really important. You know, it's nice with all some of the things I'm dealing with at the moment, just to kind of just get out of that and just focus on what you're all saying, and actually just to thank you all. I mean, it's amazing what you've all been doing in your different ways this year. If I could just flick through some of the themes there, then Kirsty, I definitely heard the pitch for a bigger space and working better with local authorities. I mean, I think this is an issue, isn't it? How the statutory sector relates to the voluntary and community and faith sector at times. You know, it can be patchy, can't it? I mean, I think in Tameside, I think when it comes to some of the work you're involved in, Kirsty, they do have quite a good track record, I think, in sort of working with people in and around Ashton, particularly on homelessness. But I think it's a journey, isn't it? And I think that the statutory sector's come a long way, but it still needs to go a lot further. And almost you need to start with volunteers and communities. That was what Wigan did when they came along with the Wigan deal. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but a very sort of visionary chief executive called Donna Hall, who is still in Greater Manchester. She's chair of Royal Bolton NHS Trust. But Donna started with this philosophy. She turned, Wigan was a very old-fashioned top-down council, and Donna came in and she turned it right on its head and say, no, we start with people in communities and listen to them. And it was so, honestly, I was a Wigan MP, a Wigan Borough MP at the time, and it was just fantastic. But I still think local authorities have got to sort of live that, and there's more to be done there. And actually that takes me in some ways to Tom and Naomi from Mutual Aid Network. I think through COVID, our 10 councils have rethought things a little bit via the community hubs that they set up, because the community hubs were there just to provide more immediate support without all of the hoops and the needs assessments and all the bureaucracy sometimes that comes with local government support. And it's certainly been embraced in the GM one-year plan that comes out of the initial response, that there are some things that we did in the response to COVID in the lockdown that almost need to become maybe permanent parts of the way we deliver things, and actually a more informal approach to delivery rather than you know, sort of always kind of going through the sort of bureaucratic approach. Might need to be something that we keep coming out of this, and start with mutual aid networks and volunteers rather than sort of seeing them as an add-on, if you like. That's just, you know, certainly something that I've heard discussed more and more in GM circles over this year. Sally, I mean, you can't really forget that speech with I mean, it was brilliant, everything that you that you said. And I think we've got to be really flexible in how we support voluntary organisations. I know, you know, everyone's had a tough year, but particularly voluntary organisations have those running premises like the ones that you're describing. And I think, let's say, you know, a kind of a flexible approach needs to be taken now in terms of funding delivered. And, you know, we've certainly done that from a GM level with some of our funding to cultural organisations. You know, we've recognised they can't do and they can't meet all of the funding commitments. So we're going to, you know, and I think that approach more broadly is something we're going to need to do. Take a stand for women's organisations, you said to me. Absolutely, we'll do that. I've visited quite a few, been to a few refuges since I took on the role. You know, safe spaces for women that empower women, critically important. And in your borough, I think you were alluding to this, weren't you? The sort of the Annie Kenny tradition. You know, we absolutely, you know, and right across GM, we need to continue to create opportunities for women to empower women, and absolutely agree with you about that. And lend me that wig next time I'm doing a big speech from having a go at Boris. Maybe that'll make him listen next time if I do it in my pink curly wig. Sonia, I know about Petrus. I know everything that, you know, you're involved in. Rochdale actually has an amazing network, doesn't it, of organisations working in the homelessness sphere. You mentioned One Heart. I mean, I've always praised them. I think they are a great example of, for those who don't know, I think is it Health Action Resource? No, it's something like that, isn't it? I'm trying to remember what the initials in Heart stand for. 14,000 meals. My goodness, that is unbelievable. I mean, you talked about sustainability. You know, I'm always on this. You know, I created a bed every night, which you're involved with as well, and there are 480 people tonight in bed every night in Greater Manchester. 480. Bear in mind that scheme didn't exist 2 years ago. It only began in November 2018. And so I worry about the sustainability of bed every night. Additional to that, we've got about 500 people still in the hotel provision that was paid for during the first lockdown. 3,000 plus in temporary accommodation. We're in quite a precarious position when it comes to homelessness in Greater Manchester. And I think the full effects of the economic crisis have not yet been felt, if we're honest. So how do you make all of that sustainable is something that worries me all of the while. And yeah, and I don't, believe me, trade on the goodwill, as you're saying, or the generosity, or just assume it will always be there, because I know people have worked absolutely flat out this year to do what you've all done. I'm going to make an announcement later this week about more funding for Bed Every Night, and a plan for the sort of period from now up until March to hopefully, kind of sustain everything through that period. The number of people sleeping rough in Greater Manchester is, on last count, 106. I think there's another count tomorrow night, or Thursday night actually. Thursday, isn't it? Yeah. So it is down, but we need to kind of keep the gains of this year. It's a bit ridiculous, Faye, isn't it, that it takes a pandemic for us to do the right thing and give people a decent room of their own that they can go to. Why should it take a pandemic to do that? It should be easier in normal times to do that. So loads to learn from this year and loads to try and capture. The Homelessness Action Network, I think, is a good example of how a network creates more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's a bit of the story of homelessness in Greater Manchester in the last couple of years. I hope so anyway. You're certainly a massive part of that, Petrus, and I'm really grateful to everybody at Petrus for what you've done to support us. Housing First is a success, but it too needs to move from being a pilot to becoming permanent. Homelessness is bedeviled by schemes, isn't it, and projects, and not permanence in terms of the approach that we take. And I absolutely hear your call on that. And Mimi, I'll come back to where I started about designing your ideal community leader. It's an amazing thing that you're doing, really. I mean, what it seems to me is what you're doing is giving people voice, and I've certainly kind of felt this year particularly how important that is. We set up something called the Disabled People's Panel in Greater Manchester just before lockdown. Well, they've been running for about a year. And actually, they've been critical to me this year in terms of they did a survey of disabled people in GM. And actually, this year of all years, people's experience has been radically different of it, I think. And some people have had experiences that might not be fully understood. And I think giving people voice in the way that your organisation is doing is just tremendously important. And so, yes, we will definitely distribute the packs if you can get some of those to my team, and I'd be more than happy to take one on board. Only exam I've ever failed in my life was O-level, was it CSE art, I think it was at the time. So I didn't even make it to the O-level set in art, and I failed it. And that's the only exam I think I've ever failed in my entire life. So don't expect anything particularly creative coming from me. But my daughter upstairs is self-isolating at home at the moment, but she's doing a GCSE art. She's better than me, and she will gratefully receive your book, and we will promote it in any way we can. And well done to all of you for what you're doing. Faye, shall I hand back to you?
Yes, thanks, Andy. I always tell our comms team that I'm very proud of the fact that I got an Art A-level, which is just why I can be able to comment on all of their work, but they don't appreciate it quite as much, let me tell you. So I've got some great questions here for you, but I'm just going to kick us off first because a lot of people have said they really appreciate the stand you've taken to protect the most vulnerable people in the North. But I don't think Matt Hancock and the government quite agree. So I wonder, what are you going to do next to make sure that we don't get punished for the stand that you've taken?
Yeah, clearly they don't agree. But I mean, I didn't sort of come to this myself. I mean, when I first went into Parliament, there'd be somebody that people may remember on this call, somebody called Paul Goggins, who was a Greater Manchester MP, and Paul always said to me, use your voice in politics for those who have the least voice. That should be where you start, because actually if you start there, you'll probably do a better job for everybody. So start with those who most need you to speak up for them. And I've always tried to follow that. And I think it says something that the government can't listen naturally. I mean, they created these roles in devolution. I'm not in any way using this for political reasons, but there comes a point, if they were going to lock us down and give people 67% furlough, no support to self-employed, a Greater Manchester that's already suffering would have been really damaged, I think, by that. And that was the stand that I took. Now, I honestly don't know where they just seem to want a bit of retribution now. But the point I've been making in the media today is if they're going to punish us for speaking up for low-paid people, then we're going to continue to clash with them, because we will continue to do that. So it's obviously a difficult situation, but I will carry on looking at the evidence. I'm sorry if this is going to be disappointing to people on the call, but I think on the evidence, it's unlikely that we will be in tier 2 come Thursday. I think we will still be in tier 3, if I'm being honest with everybody on the call. There is some improvement across our boroughs, but it's not yet fully sort of firmly established, and it's definitely not yet being felt in the NHS, which is still under its sort of maximum level of pressure at the moment. I hope that position will continue to improve over December. I hope we would be in tier 2 come January. But you know, I just hope, what I would say to the government is make the decisions on the evidence and leave the politics out of this, because actually there's no justification to change people's lives on the back of political retribution or point scoring. So I'm not doing that, and I'd ask them to do the same.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, so I've got 2 questions, one from Alison Horsdale, which is about UBI, and one which is from Naomi Davis about digital inclusion. So Alison, if you're there, do you want to unmute yourself and ask Andy your question about UBI?
Yes, have I successfully unmuted?
You have. Hi, Alison.
Brilliant. Hi, Andy. Yeah, I've been listening today and just hearing about all these fantastic projects, fantastic people, and all the people that are affected. I'm very passionate about universal basic income. I can't think of anything that anybody's mentioned so far that couldn't be helped if we could get UBI to work. So I've got a very specific question, very specific ask. I'll read my question out. A universal basic income would help everyone and leave no one excluded. That's what I believe. And you've expressed clear support for this idea this year. Would you now join the growing UBI cross-party group of MPs, councillors and peers and others to explore and influence this work? This is a fantastic new innovation of a cross-party group that doesn't just run cross-party, it runs up and down all levels. And it would be fantastic to have you on that group and to have representation for Manchester so that we could explore. I know there's a lot of discussion, a lot of arguments about UBI, but we could actually see if we could make it work. And I feel that's the place where there could be traction and influence at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. And I'm going to take the question from Naomi Davis on digital inclusion, and then we'll ask Andy to respond to both of those. Naomi, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, sorry to be greedy and speak twice. Just to say that we noticed how excluded people were digitally, and obviously we weren't the only people to notice that. But the 2 things that really affects are isolation, as you obviously know, education and employment. And although we've been concentrating on, you know, emergency response and crisis things to do with the pandemic, a lot of us are now turning towards the future and how we can help support people get better jobs, local jobs, and better prospects for everybody. But it just feels really hard because the ways that we tried to find to get equipment or to help people get Wi-Fi, they just really weren't there. There was a little trails of breadcrumbs that went nowhere. And I don't think this should be a begging bowl scenario. I don't think this should be a charitable thing. This should be something that we can deal with and sort out and part of infrastructure. So I'd love to know if we can get more support around that.
Great, thanks, Andy. Do you want to come back on those 2?
I will. So Alison, first answer to your question, yes, if they would have me as a member of the group, absolutely. I think if you look back at the pandemic, you have to conclude that the poorest people in the poorest communities have been dangerously exposed to everything that's happened this year. And that is as a result of their work, their housing and their income levels, because some people have just not been able to self-isolate, have they, if they needed to. And actually, it was all laid bare in February in the Marmot report. I don't know if you saw that, the 10 years on of the Michael Marmot's review of health inequalities. He demonstrated clearly that poor quality work, poor quality housing seriously damage people's health. So where I'm coming at this from, absolutely, I think, if you had a universal basic income, you would save so much money in other ways. We were just talking to Sonia about homelessness. how much do we spend dealing with the consequences of homelessness rather than just setting people up to succeed rather than set people up to fail? I personally like the idea of housing first being a national policy, where the issue of a safe, decent home is a human right in UK law, and I think that could be part of an approach to UBI that also kind of guarantees affordable housing as part of the overall package. So I think there are different ways of looking at it, aren't there? But I think the foundation of a good home with a level of income that is enough to live on, you've got a chance then. Without those two things, your head is going to be bobbing under the water, isn't it, all over the time? And so I absolutely agree with you about it. And I think for those who'd say it's unaffordable or a pie in the sky, what the public sector wastes through not having those things by paying for failure constantly in crisis is more than what it would take just to set people up properly from the off. So absolutely with you, happy to join the group, and let's get this campaign properly moving. And it's in similar thing, Spirit, that I would answer your question, Naomi, because I mentioned the Disabled People's Survey before. What came through that loud and clear was kind of how digital is moving from a sort of a nice to have to an essential. And this year and all years, some people have been out of the conversation because they can't afford the devices or the data packages. And that no longer is acceptable when so much of life is taking place in this kind of space that we're in this afternoon. And that becomes a matter of human rights as well, as far as I can see, particularly when public services are increasingly being delivered via digital means. Primary care has taken a massive jump towards the digital space this year. So in that world, how can you not do something much more radical to get people online? And so I think that is almost something that needs to be a matter of human right, because you will miss out on so much if you are not included digitally. And that whole issue of digital inclusion needs to move from a sort of, as I say, a slightly fringe issue, nice to have, and we'll get round to it one day type issue, which is sort of how the public sector has seen it, to a much more central issue where you connect everybody so that everybody can be part of the conversation, and potentially you can deliver services better as well and more efficiently to people. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, on both of those fronts, I think we need to revisit our assumptions about what is basic and what is essential for everybody so that they can have a good, fully involved life.
Great, thanks, Andy. Oops. Great, thanks, Andy. So we've got 10 more minutes, so I'm going to take 2 more questions. If you can keep your questions very short then. So I'm going to ask Kat Purcell to come in on hubs, and she talked about the disparity in hubs across Greater Manchester, and Barry Pollard to come in on community space. And so just while they're preparing that, just to say, Andy, one of the comments in the chat was that mutual aid was actually one of the drivers towards action around homelessness. And actually, that's quite an interesting thought about the power of mutual aid, isn't it? Okay, so Kat Purcell, are you able to ask your question? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, hi, thank you. It's a very quick question, and it probably centres a bit around the eternal 10+1 conversation of the city region of Greater Manchester. But there's something around the approach that a lot of public sector partners have taken in supporting, being apathetic, downright being really hostile against mutual aid groups and other less formal groups that have been set up throughout the pandemic. So that recognition of the work is certainly not universal across the city region. And so there's something around moving forward. What could you do, Andy, in terms of providing the leadership that is genuinely needed at some localities level in creating and sort of supporting those relationships? Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Great question. And Barry Pollard, are you ready to unmute yourself?
Yep, I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, he was kind of following on from Naomi's around the digital inclusion. Obviously, libraries used to be a really, really big place where people used to go, and other community centres, and with community centres and spaces disappearing very, very quickly, and especially during lockdown there wasn't any. It's how we can improve that and get that better. As I say, I've just also put in there the Maslow's hierarchical needs used to be the joke that Wi-Fi was on the bottom. It's now not a joke anymore. It's now just, that's what it should be. Internet connection is critical for most people nowadays.
Hi Faye, we've got 2 more comments in the chat where they might want to ask questions. Should we bring them in now, and then Andy can respond to all of them?
Yes, please.
So we've got Angela Fell, who was talking about neighbourhood democracy. You might want to bring that up with Andy. And we've got Joe Forster as well, who was writing a comment in the chat. And we also have a lot of love for Ali and Inspire Women, and asking for your support on their work. So should we start with Angela?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't really have a question, but I will take this opportunity. I'm really interested in all the neighbourliness and that developed, and the way that mutual aid grew without it becoming organised. And I'm interested too about how that links to democracy and how we grow that and build that in community at a neighbourhood level with some of the devolving. Because I sit in Wigan and I hear what people say about my town in terms of the deal, and I agree with some of it and I disagree with quite a lot of it. I think democracy has been dismantled, and I think there's enough, and I'm not saying that's from the deal, saying that's kind of like nationally happened. So I think there's a real opportunity now, and I don't know how you think we can grow that with citizen assemblies and deliberative stuff and neighbourhood management. It seems like now is the time. And I was just listening to, I was in the Sheffield workshop and thinking about the positioning of the voluntary and the community sector, and the tension between the voluntary and the community sector and the growth of mutual aid, and whether that could be repositioned to build and grow something that builds on what Mimi was talking about, where we have neighbourhood democracy that includes everybody and invites people in, rather than that old way of doing things that only invites in a certain type of person.
Great, thank you, Angela. And can we, Joe, would you like to say something? Joe Forster, if you're still here. If not, we'll go back to Andy.
Great, thank you, Johnny. So actually, pick up some of those points. So, Kat, on your point, and Angela was touching on similar themes there. I think what I would ask is, if some of you who've been involved could send your impressions of how it differs, across the 10, and where it's good and where it isn't. I don't think it's necessarily hostility in any way. What I think it is public bodies might find it a concept they find it harder to deal with because it's less structured. That doesn't mean to say they can't learn to find a way, and we need to sort of get over some of those barriers. Because obviously the resource that mutual aid offers is massive, isn't it? And it's, as I say, the informality of it is its strength in some ways. It's not overly bureaucratic and all the rest of it. So I think we've got to kind of capture this year, don't we, and the good things that have come from it, and then learn to say, well, how do we make this work with public bodies and the assessment sort of processes they've got. So, that would be my answer, Kat. If you could give me sort of some feedback really as to where it's been good and where it has worked and why it has worked in certain places. What were the kind of key ingredients that made it happen like that compared to some other areas where you found the barriers have gone up or the shutters have come down, and just trying to understand that. As I say, there was an intention to kind of try and build on some of this from this year. So, it would be consistent with what we say we are trying to do. So hopefully that's helpful. Barry, on your point of view, I mean, from your perspective about places where people can connect community centres, libraries. I agree with you. That's a real worry. We're looking at a situation here where the spending, we've got a spending review tomorrow. I don't know what they will say about local government, and whatever our feelings about it, it is critical that funding at this level to make some of the stuff we're all talking about work. What I do know is our 10 are still looking at a major shortfall next year, and that is worrying when it comes to those community spaces that you're talking about, and reopening them, and obviously reinvesting in them. So yeah, it's quite a worrying outlook at the moment. But I couldn't agree with you more that digital inclusion needs to absolutely go up the list of priorities. And if we can't provide it in community venues, you need to start installing it in people's homes, because it's essential now, isn't it? Andrew, I get what you're saying. I mean, I wasn't holding the Wigan deal up as saying it's perfection. I think a journey began under Donna, as far as I could see, where it was a different way of looking at things. The community were taken for granted in the old Wigan Council way that I remember. And actually she turned that around and said, look, start seeing them as assets and build up from those assets. And now I'm not saying it was a journey that was begun, and I'm not saying it's in any way complete. I'm all in favour of looking at how we can open up that sort of participatory sort of democracy at local level that you're describing. It's I think what was started in Wigan needs to sort of be taken deeper and further, is what I would say, and that's the way in which you can sort of restore local democracy, isn't it? To go in that direction. I inspire, absolutely. Don't worry, I'm fully supportive of, and I'll make a particular commitment to colleagues to inspire. Just so I've got the name, it was Inspire Oldham, wasn't it? Inspire Women Oldham. Is that right? If there was a particular issue I need to help with there, with regard to the funding of the centre and the reopening, etc., I'm more than happy to pick that up as a separate conversation, Faye, if that would be helpful. And that goes for any of the organisations on here. We're conscious that you're all going to face a pretty sort of turbulent few months as we still kind of work through what remains of this pandemic, and let's hope we're in a position where it is what remains of it. I was just in a meeting earlier today where we are told that we might be vaccinating within a fortnight. So I think you all need some good news, don't you? So that is my little bit of good news for you for today. I mean, it is possible that we could be, starting we're at the beginning of the end, if I could put it that way, and I know that all of your organisations will need help restarting. So Inspire Women Oldham, yeah, come to me, speak to me, see how I can help you, and I'll put you in touch with Sean Fielding, the council leader, as well, and we'll both, I'm sure, do what we can to help.
Brilliant, thanks Andy. I think we're all desperate to get rid of 2020, so yes, good news. That's the year's coming to an end, and there's an end in sight for COVID. So Andy, has it been useful for you to hear voices in this format today, and is it something that you think you'd like to do more of in the future?
It's been extremely helpful, and it's actually the way I like to do my own politics, in that, what I tend to pick up, I mean, you may not think this when you're making your speeches and your contributions, but things that I just, sometimes something catches me, and I often pick up those straws in the wind, Faye. That's how I tend to work. I did an interview in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, and I said that I'd changed my style, really. Going back sort of 20 years ago, I was the typical bloke in a blue suit with a red tie, turning up for the opening of an envelope and cutting ribbons here and there. And actually, I don't do it like that so much. I still will open things if people ask me, but what I do prefer doing is getting out and about, just being on the same level, listening to what people are saying, just picking up what's in the wind. So no, definitely, this is really helpful. It's what I like. It's what I like to do. And there's been a few things that have stuck with me today that people have said. So. I think the key is this year's not, you say it's been bad, and it has been bad, but it's not been all bad, has it? In terms of, there has been some innovation in the way things are done that needs not to be lost as we are kind of coming out of this. Definitely in homelessness, I think there's big things that have been achieved that should be achieved in any normal year. There should be more of it done in a normal year. And I think there's more to be done in terms of rethinking our relationship with the voluntary and community sector. When I came in as mayor, I kept saying they're equal partners. The public sector needs to start with them as equal partners. There's been a bit of progress, but it's still obviously a mindset that we need to shift. But I think I like to think in GM we do start from a bottom-up approach to life. You know, increasingly that's where we're going. You know, how we are building devolution in Greater Manchester. All voices are equal. All voices are involved in Greater Manchester. You know, we have our disabled people's panel, but we're setting up a race equality panel, women and girls. But we're trying to create a culture of all voices in devolution, and that actually came from the original People's Powerhouse event that I kind of went to. I think I was only a couple of weeks elected. It was Doncaster, wasn't it? It was the stadium in Doncaster. And I buy that. You know, the notion of People's Powerhouse, every voice in devolution, is what we should be doing. And I think this pandemic, as I'll finish on this, but I feel a bit this year, we've been a victim of the old default mentality in Whitehall and Westminster. So when the crisis began, instead of localizing as they should have done, they centralized. If they'd have localized, just imagine a different world where they'd localized and they'd said to us, okay, you stand up a test system and you stand up the contact tracing with local volunteers, and the billions we've given to Serco, we'll actually give them to local areas instead. And you know what? You buy the PPE and see if there are local companies in your area that could make that PPE. You know, imagine if they'd localized this response and they'd use the capability of our councils, because our councils do have great capability, but also them working then through you, working through our local companies. It could have been different, couldn't it? And, you know, I just think that's why we've ended up at loggerheads with the government, because they've centralized and privatized instead of localizing. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people who kind of look at that now and can see that they've, you know, that the way they've gone about things has almost created some of the worst outcomes that we could have had, particularly when it comes to test and trace. So I'll leave it there. Faye. You live in hope, don't you, that people will live and learn, and I will try our best anyway in Greater Manchester to build from the bottom up in all 10 of our. Thank you to everybody for your contributions today.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for coming along and listening, and thank you to everyone who contributed to our session. And it's a really nice positive note to end on, that what we need to do is build on the lessons from this year, and as Andy says, lots of positive stuff, but even where things haven't gone quite right, we know the way to do them now. So let's all move forward in 2021, building on what we've already learned this year. Thank you very much, everybody.
And you've passed your interview to be a chat show host there. You've got the job. Okay,
if there's any TV people out there, I'm ready to be signed.
Okay,
brilliant job.
Cheers, everybody.